Welcome to another episode of Off Script. I'm Will.
And I'm Ashley.
And today we're starting a two-part series. We're here about halfway through the year. So just going to talk about how to best position yourself to be successful in the second half of 2025. So today we're going to talk about sellers and who better to talk about sellers or listings than Ashley, right?
Let's do it.
Best in the game. And then we'll talk about buyers coming up Thursday on how to structure those conversations to be successful in the second half of 2025. As we get closer to the end of 2025, we can start talking about business planning and doing different things like that to position yourself well to start the year, right? Cool. So high level, what do you from a seller standpoint, what are you seeing in the market? What's happening?
I would say somewhat of panic from some sellers. I think a lot are like listening to the media and feeling like we're in a market crash or a huge recession. And I think if you look at the data, and we talked a little bit about this on our last episode with the market data, it feels more like we're in a market repositioning, if you will. Like inventory's up 10%, days on market's up a little bit. So there's more options for buyers. Houses are sitting a little bit longer, but with strategy and marketing and pricing effectively, homes are still moving. But I would say that the temperament from clients that I'm working with as sellers is a lot of education needed. There's this mindset of we're in the market we were in 6 months to a year ago, and the thought that my home's going to fly off the market and I'm going to have multiple offers and tons of showings, and that's their perception. So I feel like my job right now is to bring them down to like reality and what we're actually seeing in the market and take the time to educate them so that it can cause a little bit less panic when we are on the market. And if they're only seeing, 3, 4, 5 showings, that's totally normal right now.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like when you have a market that is changing or beginning to change, which is kind of what we've been experiencing this year, where 1 week is crazy, it's hot, everything's moving really quickly, and then it's like almost like a complete standstill. I think those are the indicators of a market changing, right?
Yeah.
And I think our job as agents, and one of our main responsibilities, is to manage emotion and help people understand, like, you're entering the market during this specific amount of time, but the markets continue to go, and they have been for so long, right? So it's not an uncommon market that we're in, I imagine, and there's agents that have been selling forever that are probably feeling totally fine and comfortable with this, right? But if you haven't been in the real estate market for more than 2, 3, 4 years, this might be something completely different to you.
Yeah, I mean, College World Series and 4th of July, we're in 4th of July week right now as we're filming, so these are always a little bit of a lull during the summer time, so this is normal to feel this way. And if we can pull ourselves out of like a couple of scenarios where homes are sitting on the market and price reductions and things like that and really look at it, our average days on market is only 17 or 19 days, 17 or 19 days, somewhere around there. So less than 3 weeks. So that tells me that we're still in a healthy market, if you will, for sellers. Like we're becoming a little bit more neutral, and we're seeing it go the opposite direction of what we saw before, where things were flying off the market. But we're not in this awful market right now where sellers can't sell their listings, but there is that temperament out there from some people. And I think a lot of that is, like you said, people not managing emotions, or agents maybe not knowing how to have convos, because even talking to 2 other agents in the industry, some of them are in panic mode as well if their listings aren't selling immediately or they're on the market for 2 weeks.
Yeah. It's funny because in my coaching sessions with our agents, I'm hearing a lot of like, I priced this right, yet it's still sitting. And then you can hear the fear in their voices, right? And so we've got to be able to understand what's happening and know that patience and time are so important. And every situation is different, where some sellers may be very, very impatient, or they may need to hurry because of their situation, which then will cause these, reactions of like price drops and I can't believe this is happening. How do we have no showings, or this many showings and no offers yet? And those I think from like an agent perspective, don't let one listing totally change your view of how to list homes.
Yeah.
Like one listing is one listing, and price points vary, different neighborhoods vary. So manage your own emotion first, and then your clients, because I am seeing like one of our agents priced hers conservatively, or what we thought to be conservatively. Took about 10 to 14 days, but it's easy to say that, right? 10 to 14 days, but that's a long time for a seller today.
Yes, it feels like it.
It feels like an eternity to them. So you're getting messages back of like, any offers, any offers, any offers?
Why isn't my home selling? What's wrong with my listing?
Yeah. So, and those are the things we're starting to hear from sellers. So that's what we're going to talk about today in those conversations. But yeah, I feel like then her next one, no showings the whole first weekend and then multiples.
Yep.
So same agent, 2 different listings. That first weekend having no private showings or offers definitely was like fear-based, because it's like, look what just happened on the last one. Is this happening again? And it didn't. Now it's multiple offers. Everything went just as it is, right? So that's where it's like that up and down, and you got to be able to navigate that.
Yes.
Especially going into the market we're going into.
Yep. It's easy to doubt yourself.
Yeah. You talked about this the other day. You're like, you had to talk through with your sellers, like, I've done the same process on 60 listings. They've all sold this year. This is not like this is.
Yeah, I had to like hype myself up before the call. I started questioning my ability for a minute there, because if you get a really negative seller or somebody that is really, really impatient, you start questioning yourself. And I had to kind of go back to the basics and remind myself, like you just said, like, I've done this 60 times within the last 12 months, several times within the last month. So like, I know what I'm doing. I've done this over and over again. Here's what I know is work. Here's a tried and true method. Here's how we've positioned your listing, and just kind of go back to that and remind them that your house has only been on the market for 7 days. This is completely normal not to have an offer yet. Like, if we get one, great, they can come anytime. And speaking of that person, we're getting an offer on their house today. So,
awesome.
And, very, very anxious seller, somebody that I had to go and remind myself to slow down and pause and reset and educate them and not panic.
Yeah, and you rely and trust the process, right? Like, there's such a trust. You're a process-driven agent, which is how we've built what we've built here, following the processes that you've built and continue to share. And I feel like that's like, trust your process, understand that there's going to be anomalies and different things that happen, but just see it through. Okay, so with our next piece of this is going to be the conversations that are happening now that are a little bit more challenging, and how they must change. So the first one is the pricing strategy combo.
Yeah.
How's that going with sellers, especially coming out of the last few years? Sellers just not that they could price wherever they wanted, but for the most part, price where you want. If you're in the range, you're going to get an offer. Yeah,
I have several recent examples that it's easy to speak to, and this little scenario we have written down is their neighbors. I actually did sell their neighbor's house 6 months ago, and so I'm selling the house directly next door, and they obviously, everyone is very emotionally tied to their home. My house is better. It should sell for a lot more. It should sell a lot quicker. Their neighbor sold one day, multiple offers. We listed theirs a little bit on the higher end when we pulled the comps. Theirs definitely is valued a little higher. They do have some nice updates, but they wanted to start a little bit higher, which we talked through that and what can happen with that. And part of that pricing strategy is to also talk to them about the current state of the market, and that it gets really easy to compare yourself to your neighbor's house or what happened. But we also have to remind themselves, even 6 months ago, we're in a completely different market than we're in now. And it's not as easy as looking at apples to apples. This house sold a year ago for this price this quickly, because in 12 months or even in 6 months, the temperament of the market's different. The temperament of the buyers are different. Interest rates are different. What buyers are getting with negotiations and closing costs are different. So it's our job to kind of remind them from a pricing strategy is we have to price it in the current state of the market we're in, and then listen very quickly to what the market is telling us once we go on the market. And you listen and adapt by talking to them about showing activity, feedback, what you're getting, if you're getting any offers, if there's no activity. And one thing to remind yourself is no activity is feedback. By not having any showings on your listing for 2 straight weeks, that is feedback. I'm pivoting a little bit. I had an agent ask me the other day, getting some feedback on their listing. It wasn't an agent in our brokerage. And she's like, well, I don't have any feedback for my sellers because we haven't had any showings in 3 weeks. So I don't have any feedback to give them on what we should do with the price. And in a kind way, my answer was, I think that is your feedback. The feedback is the market is rejecting you guys at this price. If you've been on market for 3-4 weeks with 0 activity, 0 views, 0 showing, that is 100% your feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what a great point too, right? Would you, like, from a year ago to today, how have setting expectations changed when it comes to, I don't know if you have like
Yeah.
if it changes per price point for you, but showings, time, price reduction, how has that changed over the past year?
Yeah, I would say setting the expectations of patience with the sellers is where it's significantly changed and what to expect. I think even a year ago, and I gauge it based on what I'm experiencing in my own listings. So I would say I'm telling them, don't panic. Stay calm, be patient. If we're not getting multiple offers and tons of showings, because in their mind they're thinking I should be having 20, 30 showings, this crazy busy weekend, and all various price points, that I'm having to set the expectations that that's not the norm anymore. So my conversation is shifting more to education based, like I said, about what the inventory looks like, what the buyer's temperaments are, what to expect some negotiations, expect some closing costs to be asked for. That doesn't mean at the listing table we have to give it all away and tell them we're going to do that, but like I set that expectation with them. A year ago, I wasn't setting the expectation with sellers that you're going to get a tons of requests for closing costs and inspections and all of these things, because we were in a totally different market. So I think the conversation has just changed of getting them in that headspace so that when it does happen, I'm not having to like argue with the seller or try and prove a point to them. I can go reference back to the listing appointment and say, hey, remember we talked about this 3 weeks ago, that it's not uncommon for us to get an offer that's going to ask for some closing costs, because the buyers have a lot more options now and they're getting those on other listings. So I'm kind of setting that during the listing appointment, and then we're pricing and positioning the home strategically, layering in the expectation that we may have to pay some of the buyer's closing costs to get a deal together.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the conversation. And sometimes it's telling the sellers what they don't necessarily want to hear. But I think that's our job, like you said, is to speak to their emotions, the current situation, to set expectations, educate them, and not necessarily tell them what they want to hear, but tell them the truth and be transparent, because it makes the conversation a lot easier. When reality happens, that we all know what the reality is going to happen. We're just avoiding that conversation at the listing table because we want to try and secure the listing.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? A couple things there. Number one, I feel like we should do this. We need to start tracking showings and offers on each listing. I don't know why like that dawned on me now that that's something we need to start tracking.
I do that.
Like we
have a little spreadsheet.
We need to have that for everyone.
Yeah, I guess I should share that, huh?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and we can pull that out of showing time too.
Yeah, cool. So
yeah,
we're going to do that.
Whoops.
Second time.
Maybe I'll just move this.
The actual conversations that you're talking about. When the market's changing like this and sellers have a specific view, and we talked about earlier, like managing emotion. So you set the expectation of this is what could happen.
Yeah.
This could possibly go wrong, right?
Yeah.
We could get no showings. We could get this, no offers. Like, how are you going back to that? How does that sound? Like, hey, do you remember when we talked about this without being rude?
Yeah.
Like, we already talked about this, Mr. or Mrs. Seller. Like,
right.
Do you not remember?
Yeah. I'm not rude about it by any means. So, well, first, I get really granular when we look at the comps in their specific neighborhood, because keep in mind, we're not just telling them, like, average days on market is 3 weeks, and here's how quick things are, because it's very specific in price point and specific in neighborhood, so I'm getting very granular to their specific data. But I can speak to one just recently that I think in this market, even being off by $10,000 can significantly impact the traffic on a listing. Like, that's how temperamental the market is right now. So we pulled comps for this particular seller, and we felt it should be priced between $310, $315. The seller wanted to start at $350. I had a conversation about like $325 was a good landing spot, where we have comps that we can support up to that, but the market's kind of shifting more away, and we really think it's going to land closer to $310, $315, but we can try this. And if we don't have any showings, any offers, any activity first couple weeks on market, let's go ahead and do a price reduction. So I'm getting ahead of that at the listing table, and I'm explaining that to them. And then I'm also identifying their specific situation and speaking to that specific situation. These people have a house that they're under contract with, so we also have a 48-hour first right of refusal. So they have to be a little bit more motivated than the average seller. We don't have the leverage of time in this specific situation that every seller has if they're selling and they don't have to sell in order to buy. They have a little bit more leverage than we have. So that plays into the conversation as well of, hey, how important is it for us to get the home that we're under contract with on the buy side? We might have to, in your mind, make a little bit of a sacrifice or adjustment on the list side to make that happen if we want to reach the end goal, which is getting you into your dream home over in your acreage in Iowa, which is what I'm always re-bringing them back to, is what is the end result that we're working towards? And so what ended up happening is we're, a week on market, which I'm not panicking. We don't have any other offers on the other house, but the seller is panicking. So I have to meet the seller where they're at. And my conversation with them was, we got on a pricing strategy call of, we can do two things. We can wait and see what happens, and we can stick at the 325, knowing we've had little activity. Remember, we talked about this at the listing table, that this is a possibility that this could happen, and then you guys are going to be faced with a decision to make. And today we're making that decision a week later, because we're in, we as in the sellers, in panic mode. And so we can either continue to do nothing and sit at 325 and wait and see if some things happen and give it a couple of weeks, or we can reposition and make an adjustment to that suggested value that we talked about the listing table, which should create some more movement, some more interest, more activity in your listing, which is going to ultimately get you to your end goal of getting in that home. Right. And if we choose not to do the reduction, which is completely your guys' choice, are you okay with losing out on that listing if another offer comes in and we cannot get an offer within 48 hours? And that's really a decision that they're making. Yeah. It's their choice, not mine. My job is to guide them and speak to the emotions of the situation and the reality of the situation that they're in. And the reality is, not every seller has the same leverage as each other.
That's right.
And so that's my job, is to pull them out of the details of things and of their specific situation in comparison to their seller, because their seller was in a different situation than you. Here's our reality. And what do you want to do? Because we have an opportunity to make movement, to make change, to control the situation a little bit, to get you an offer, and that's your choice.
Yeah. And then
did that answer your question?
Yeah, and on the other side of that, right? Who knows what's going to happen on the other listings? Yeah. And knowing that information is super important. Is it 400, 500 plus, or is it a downsize and it's smaller and it's could get an offer pretty quickly? So there's so many different nuances to that.
Yeah, that kind of triggered my memory a little bit with you saying that. It kind of placed me in that exact call. My exact conversation was something along the lines of, I can't guarantee you an offer within the next 5 days, but I also can't guarantee you that the other house that we're under contract also won't get an offer within the next 5 days. But what I can tell you is, by doing the price reduction, if we have the wiggle room, like we spoke about at the listing table, is that more likely than not we'll create movement, we'll create more interest, and that's going to tell us what we need to know. And so we did end up doing a reduction on Friday after talking through that. We had a couple more people come to the open house, and I don't have it in writing yet, but it's been communicated to me that we're getting an offer from somebody that came to the open house.
But movement, right?
So movement, right?
We got some activity.
Where my job is to put them in the best position to get an offer, to get them to their end goal.
Yeah. And when you're going super micro, right? Very local. So these things are just. When we go super micro, we're going into the neighborhood to see what the trends are, and you're pulling days on market. Make sure you're looking through all of the days on market, not just the average. I think especially right now, where listing agents are probably putting themselves in a bad spot. If you have 2 listings that sold in a day, and you have 2 that sold in 30 days, right? And you're telling your people your average is 18 or 19. You have 10 days there, right? Yep. 10 days of which it's past 19, 20. When if you would have looked at the numbers, it said you're either going to probably sell this within the first 3 to 4 days, or it looks like 30 to 40 is actually where we're going to sell if we don't sell that first weekend. Yep. And those trends are super important to look at right now.
Yeah, I'm becoming more of a data person. I love the data now. That's rubbed off from you. But I think it is so important to look at it, because you'll see trends a lot of the times when we're looking at those comps. And I'm going through that with the seller so they can see that with their own eyes, and it's not me just telling them. There's usually a very clear trend, that a correlation of when I'm showing them that the days on market is shorter, those houses were priced very appropriately and conservatively or competitively, whatever word you want to use, in the market, and sold usually at or a little bit above asking, or somewhere right around 100% of what their listing price is. And then you'll notice that the ones that had the longer days on market, there's a direct correlation. You'll usually see, when you look at the list price to sold price, because that's what I'm showing them, there's typically a trend that those started high and did multiple price reductions, or some type of price reduction, or even if there wasn't a price reduction, accepted the offer well below asking. And there's always a direct correlation with that higher days on market and the list price to sold price. And so I'm using that and sharing that as an example with the sellers in this specific scenario. I might as well just use this whole scenario for this conversation of, we're only talking $10,000. Our recommended list price is $310, $315. They wanted, $350, but we were still landed on $325 and still felt it should be $310, $315. And that $10,000 did make a difference. So my conversation with them is, well, if we look at the data, we're on the higher end of where we think we should be. It's not uncommon that your house may sit on the market closer, even though the average days is, let's say, 16, closer to 30, 45, 50 days, because that's what we're seeing with the houses that were priced a little bit above where the market is tolerating or what the comps are showing. If you want to price it here, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, which is what the numbers are showing, you should see movement a lot quicker and most likely an offer within 7 days or under.
Yep.
And so that's kind of what that conversation looks like. And it's your choice. Which one do you want to do? Well, they want to start high, and then, now it's easy to redirect. Well, this is exactly what we talked about, and here we are. What do you want to do?
Yeah. The cool thing about this is the market always is true. Like it always keeps things fair and honest. It's going to tell you if you're at the right price, if you're not. Our job is to just navigate through it and where it's going and what direction we're heading. So next point we had here was like your pre-listing call. So your pre-listing call, obviously figuring out about the property, what's going on, what's condition, what kind of updates have been made. Are you doing anything different there when it comes to like setting expectations, how things are going to move afterward? If it's a colder lead, like listing with me, doing different commands and stuff like that. Is there anything that's changed on your pre-listing call?
Well, I would say I didn't usually have to build as much credibility and tell them about my experience and credibility, but I definitely feel, especially with colder leads, they're craving that more. They want to know, they're seeing what we're seeing. They're hearing what other agents are talking about, what's happening in the media, people saying the market's slowing down. That's very fear-based, fear-driven. So they're wanting a lot of reassurance, much more confidence, and I didn't used to typically bring a resume to listing appointments, but now I actually, I had Nicole make up a nice little resume with my credibility in sales, and I'm speaking more to my credibility in the process before getting into the full listing appointment. I'm doing a little bit on the phone. I'm educating them on how it's important to go slow to the market if you can, and it's going to be much more of a payoff and a reward to you if you can take the time to better prepare your home, declutter it, and I'm always a proponent of staging. Anybody who's listened to me will know I'm a big fan of that. But more important now, I would say, than ever, is going slow to the market and doing it the right way, because buyers are pickier, buyers have more choices, and those homes that are presented well, show well, staged well, decluttered, and you've done the things and taken the time to do it, if you have a couple of months and you're not in I have to hurry up and sell, those listings are the listings that are winning and that are moving quickly, because that's what buyers want.
Yeah.
I mean, they've always wanted that, but buyers didn't necessarily have the choice years ago. It was just, get me a house. Right. And now they have the option, and they're going to choose the ones that stand out and are presented really well to the market.
Yeah, and historically, they don't even have what would be a normal buyer's market options yet, and just having a little bit's like, oh, we have options, we can start to negotiate, right?
Yep. So I think storytelling is what helps, right? Tell them a story of a situation that recently happened where a seller chose not to do that, or had to go quick, and the impacts of that. And
use future pace, right? Like when we get to these different areas throughout, like you've been in it so many times. So the pre-listing call is building credibility.
I didn't realize these were magnet.
That's the very last one. Pre-listing call is getting property condition, but setting more expectation and building credibility of what's going to happen at the appointment. So not too much change there, I imagine, from your process.
No, I mean, I would say just that, and then asking deeper questions and more specific to their situation of, if it's a colder lead, why haven't you listed yet? Or if they're very agent shy or don't want to work with an agent, were you wronged by an agent in the past? Did something go bad with an agent? And I want to hear about that story so I can understand their pain points and then better adapt to their unique situation. So I would say I'm going much deeper with my conversations. I'm having the same conversations, but much deeper, because it's taking a lot more work.
Yeah, I feel like you're doing a very good job, and our team is, as a whole, doing a great job of understanding the difference between an opportunist buyer or seller or a motivated lead, right?
Yeah.
Motivated being we have a reason to do something and a timeline that we'd like to hit or have to. Opportunists, if we found the perfect home, those are two totally different conversations to be had, and your presentation probably, the urgency changes. Yeah,
the urgency changes. I would say I'm probably interviewing sellers just as much, if not more, than they're interviewing me compared to my past, because before it was, if they want to list a little bit high, like, whatever, the house is still going to sell. I mean, that was the honest truth years ago. Like, it's still going to probably sell. Let's be honest. Like, could we position it better? Yes, but it's still going to sell. And now, if the temperament is like, well, I'm just going to list it and see what happens, or 60 grand over, or whatever, like, that my time is valuable too. And I want to actually sell your house. I don't want to list your house. So I'm going to share that with them and be pretty direct in a kind way of like, is our goal to actually sell your house, and what does that need to look like? What do we need to net, and like getting to the root of everything with them, and not just taking opportunities to list a home just to list a home.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Last one of these three like main conversations that have been changing, tougher feedback on condition that maybe they don't want to hear, which I know you're getting ahead of that way early before the listing comes to the market, but tough feedback, and then offers that maybe aren't ideal. So if you've been on the market and it's a little slower, and maybe you have agents saying like, hey, condition isn't where we think, kind of help you with that pricing strategy, or offer comes in low, like, are you still trying to work with it, or like kick rocks?
I always try to work with an offer. I think another thing that I've changed my perspective through time and experience in doing this is I was probably a little bit lazier in the past, or it was like, we've all done this, agents listening, like, what's your verbal offer? Let's see if it's worth putting it in writing type of thing. Like, anybody listening who does business, I guarantee, has done that. Like, let's see if it's worth my time typing it up and asking the listing agent first. And now I just tell them to write it up. Like, even if it's a lowball offer, write it up. It gets the conversation going. It allows me to present something to seller. And even though it's going to be a tough conversation from me, like, it's the honest conversation, and it's like, we just have to figure out how to interpret that offer and how to best handle and navigate it. But an offer is an offer at the end of the day. Like, even a $40,000 below offer, it's better than no offer.
That's right.
And you'd be surprised that sometimes buyers are just testing, right? Like, if they're not super motivated, they're just testing, and then their real motivation comes out and how you negotiate. And sometimes they'll end up coming up $35,000. Like, you just never know.
That's right. Yeah, it's funny because we talked through like setting expectations a lot at the appointment. So these conversations for you get easier and easier. As for other agents, it gets harder and harder as the market changes. I wouldn't want to be in a conversation where I didn't set good expectations about price or what to expect with showings right now, because it could probably become very intense or contentious. Like, how did you put us in this spot, listing agent? So that expectation setting at the appointment is 10 times more important now than ever before.
Yeah, I don't ever want to feel that. And it will never leave me. I think Cam's the one who said it, Camilla. I would rather let you down now at the listing table than let you down later. And what she means by that is telling you the truth now and being transparent, having that hard conversation. And trust me, it's so much easier to not get the listing because you had the hard conversation than take the listing and for months and months and months be emotionally drained by the seller. And then feeling like you have no idea what to tell them because you didn't have the hard conversation then, and you're just like trying to stay positive and happy and tell them it's going to be okay. And like, nobody wants to hear that. They want a strategy. They want a plan. They want direct conversation. Like, that will always stick with me. Like, rip the Band-Aid off and have the tough conversation and be courageous enough to lose the listing appointment.
That's right. I love that. Love it. Anything else you want to add on these three? I feel like those are like our three bigger conversations that have been changing, and what we need to like really crush to have a great second half of the year with sellers.
No, I mean, it kind of sounded all doom and gloom. Like, everything has shifted a little bit, but like, sellers are still winning in this market. As a recap. Like, it's not like houses aren't selling and they're sitting on market for months and months on end, but the conversations have shifted drastically. And I think on our next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about where there's opportunities for buyers now in this market. Kind of a fun conversation to have because I feel like we've been so seller focused the last couple of years.
That's right.
And now that things are shifting a little bit, there's finally opportunities for buyers.
Yeah, doom and gloom, right? Even though we're still in the seller's market, but it's more about just having the best skill sets in order to succeed right now. So that's what our biggest focus has been, is having good conversations and practicing those day to day.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. Okay, we'll see you guys for buyers in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.